You're listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 318.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How's everybody doing today? Hope you're all doing well here in this beautiful month of October. We are having some glorious fall weather, enjoying the bright blue skies and cooler temperatures, and it is just absolutely wonderful. I do want to let everyone know who is listening, if you have any connection to East Tennessee, West North Carolina, East Georgia, or the Panhandle of Florida, our thoughts are with everyone because of the devastating effects of Hurricane Helene. I've been glued to the news a little bit, at least online, searching and looking at Asheville in particular. Spent some time down there with the business mastermind several years ago, and just heartbroken for everyone in Asheville. So our thoughts are certainly with everyone there. We returned from a nice weekend this past weekend in Chicago. Two of our older children live there, and we went up with our daughter and her boyfriend, and we had an amazing time together, watching a lot of sports. We went to the UK bar for the University of Kentucky. It's on Belmont Avenue, a place where you can watch UK basketball and UK football, and we watched UK beat Ole Miss, which was really fun. The next day, we went to the bar in Wrigleyville where the Bengals are the team that you watch, and we watched the Bengals beat the Jaguars. And that's kind of interesting because I think at the very same time the Bears were actually playing at Soldier Field, and we were not too far from there and watching the Bengals play the Jaguars. But that was fun. And then the real reason we went to Chicago was to go to watch the Reds play the Cubs at Wrigley Field on Sunday afternoon, and we beat the Cubs in 10 innings, 3-0. And that was the last home game for the Cubs, the last game for the Reds. Neither of them are in the wild card race or in the playoff race. So that was the end of the season for them for 2024. So that was an enjoyable weekend and really nice to be with everybody. And, you know, one of the things that I realize with the work that I do here with this podcast and writing cookbooks and running an online business and coaching people about writing cookbooks is the freedom that it allows me. And I think time freedom is something we can never underestimate. It's what we often all seek in anything that we are doing, is having the time to do what we want to do, making conscious and intentional decisions about the work that we're doing, things we say no to, so that we can spend time with the people we care about. And that's certainly exactly what we did this past weekend. So I'm excited today to have an interview on the podcast with Kiano Moju. Kiano is a Kenyan-Nigerian American recipe developer, producer, director, and video host. She is the author of her new book, Afri Cali, Recipes from My Jikoni. Kiano's culinary identity draws from her Kenyan and Nigerian heritage and her upbringing in the melting pot of California. Until 2019, Kiano was a creative video producer at BuzzFeed's food video vertical called Tasty, where she amassed over 100 million cumulative video views in recipe content. After departing from BuzzFeed, Kiano set her sights on starting her own media company, which led her to launch the Jikoni Recipe Archive, which celebrates the rich cuisine of Africa across the diaspora by documenting the legacy of traditional and modern cooks and amplifying the vibrant food culture. In our conversation today, Kiano and I talk all about African food as everyday food, the concept of third culture cooking, how she defines accessible recipes while making global flavors approachable, especially for cooks with limited access to ingredients, and her unique process she used to capture her family recipes that were not traditionally written down, but yet she was able to turn them into structured recipes for her cookbook. So without further delay, let's dive into this interview with Kiano Moju. Hi, Kiano. Welcome to the Cookbook Love podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so excited that you're here. Beautiful new book, Afri Cali. But before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
All right, give me 1 second. Someone's closing the house, getting out the door. Okay.
Okay, there we go.
Hi, I'm Kiano Moju. I do a lot of things in the media side, but I always say I'm the business of culinary education. I'm most recently a cookbook author with my debut cookbook, Afri Cali. But I started my career making cooking videos as a video producer for Tasty, which is BuzzFeed's food network. And so I'm very mindful that when you put a recipe out into the world, you never know who's watching it and who's reading it. So I always try to create recipes that are accessible. So no matter where you are, hopefully you can find everything you need at your local grocery store or maybe on next day shipping on Amazon.
So tell me a little bit about producing video. That's not something that everyone can do. I mean, it's something everyone can do, but a lot of people don't think that they are good at it. How did you know that you had this skill and this talent to do video?
I started at my high school in California doing video production class. So we had, the local student news where we'd have the announcements and started learning of how to produce, how to edit videos. And it's something I stuck with throughout high school was taking video production classes. But it didn't collide with food until many, many years later. In college, I did a semester abroad in London and took a photography course. And I found that the subject I was most drawn to was on the plate for a couple of reasons. One, food is delicious, but also you can shape and shift it the way you want it. Where if you're, maybe doing documentary, you're just capturing life. I liked the curation and then capture. And so it was my senior year of college. I went to Syracuse, where everything kind of found its way together, where I could photograph food, write recipes, make little videos out of my dorm. And I just stuck with it.
Yeah. So what was it like? You live in California now.
Mhm.
Were you born and raised in California?
Born and raised in California. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area.
And
So
moved to
Northern California.
Syracuse.
And then I went well, before that, I finished high school in New England. So
Okay.
2 years in Massachusetts.
Yes. So
That
you
got
got
me.
used to the difference in the weather.
I don't think I ever got used to it, but I learned to survive it.
Yes. I think that's probably true. It's funny. I know someone that went to Syracuse and they always said they knew a lot of their students, unless they were from Syracuse, they were not probably going to stay in the area. They would go back to where they were from or live somewhere else, unless
Yes,
you're really, really into winter.
I have not put toes on that campus since I graduated.
Yeah. And I think that must be something that they know is going to happen. So amazing how you click them with video and how that really, it's still, I think, relatively new in terms of food. I was talking to a podcast guest, just did a recording earlier today for a revision on a book that has been out for 35 years. And we were talking about what's happened in the food world, over the past 35 years. And video is certainly something that is one of those things.
It's a big shift. So I went back to London to do my master's in publishing and did my thesis on the rise of video online because food blogs were there, people were posting recipes, magazines were posting recipes online, but it took a really long time for video to start appearing on the internet and then consequentially on our mobile phones because even the intro video and like for cooking was maybe on YouTube and people were used to watching YouTube on their computer or on their television. But Facebook and Instagram really, it feels like overnight, but it was really, really fast. The number of cooking videos that appeared on the internet in that time around like 2014,
Yeah.
15.
Yeah. So then now you're in the print cookbook space, and that seems like an interesting jump. Tell me a little bit about your journey to print cookbook.
Yeah, it feels for me full circle because because I did my publishing master's in the UK, they started very traditional where I literally had to make books by hand. I had to submit 3 copies as my final exam of a book that it was a cookbook I did as a student. So having learned about cookbooks, authoring and shooting my own in my dorm to actually now having gone through the entire publishing process showed me that you only can learn so much in school because it's so different working with a publisher versus creating your own product. But having done the cookbook now and having been a producer for a lot of companies, Tasty, Food Network, Tastemade, I was able to bring in all my experiences into Afri Cali. So I wrote the recipes, of course, but I also art directed the book. I did all the food and prop styling. So it's very much Afri Cali is mine. I try to bring all of my experiences into this book.
Yeah, I think that's really neat for people to know when they get the book and look through it that you had a hand in such things as the art direction and the photography and the recipes and the whole style of the book, because a lot of times for authors that's not the case unless they self-publish.
Yeah, a lot of authors, I think it's just the background having come in from such a visual media part of food. It I've never published a recipe without being the one shaping the way it looks. So I definitely had to bring it into the book. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a Kiano project without it.
Yeah. So tell us, let's start kind of at a high level view of Afri Cali, what it's all about.
So I grew up in California. My mother is from Kenya. My father is from Nigeria. So East African, West African. And the Bay Area has so much international cuisine. And I feel like we had it really early on because as a kid, I was eating Ethiopian food in one week and Vietnamese food the other week and burgers the following week. So very much had a global palate growing up, but then had these two pretty different cultures from my parents. And so Afri Cali pulls from my heritage, it pulls from those experiences to really bring those flavors that I grew up with in African cuisine into really fun, accessible recipes for people.
Yeah. And how did you approach being able to do that to make them accessible?
So there are kind of like 2 camps of recipes in the book. One was curation. So looking at the dishes that I've grown up eating, seen family members make that I knew were really focused on the exact same ingredients folks already had in their house. My grandmother's cabbage, for example, so delicious. She has a great technique of just seasoning it, but it's just cabbage, carrots, onions, and cilantro. Things that a lot of folks might already have in their fridge or is right next to what they're already grocery shopping. So a lot of the recipes that are traditional, either Kenyan or Nigerian, are going to be curated of here are simple everyday recipes that are being cooked on the other side of the globe that you can now fold into your routine. And then there's dishes inspired by the flavors I grew up having. So maybe the traditional version has a couple ingredients that are you can't find easily here, or it just takes too long because with all old recipes, people had different amount of time and our lives and schedules can be a little bit busier. And so creating new recipes that pull in those key flavors that still focus on ingredients that you can easily shop.
Yeah, and let's talk about some of the dishes in the cookbook that showcase African food as part of everyday meals. You mentioned your grandmother's cabbage recipe, which sounds absolutely delicious. I love sauteed cabbage. I think you're right. I think it's one of those things that you think, I mean, how good can this be? But I mean, if you cook it correctly, and I like to get it just a little bit browned, it's so good. And I'm gonna have to try it the way that your grandmother recommends with the carrot, cilantro, and did you say a little bit of onion?
Yep.
Yep,
A little
sounds
bit of
great.
onion.
Yep. So what other kind of recipes that showcase African food for the everyday meal?
A really classic beloved dish in Nigeria is called jollof rice. Essentially, it's rice cooked in a stew, but in Nigeria, stew is very thick. It almost would look like a tomato sauce, but it's made up of tomatoes, red bell peppers, like a habanero and onion. That's all blended up and cooked down. And you're going to cook the rice in that with some stock. So it's really flavorful. One thing that now having the book out there in the world, people have been picking up on is the use of vegetables in so many of the recipes because both Kenyan and Nigerian food use vegetables not just as, okay, let's be healthy, but as a way to build flavor. And so it's a really nice way to create a more exciting side dish versus just plain old rice. And then a weeknight favorite of mine is it's a Kenyan style. We call it wet fry. It's basically a stir fry, but it's called wet because you'll use something like tomatoes that will create a little bit of a gravy in your pan. And so there's a beef version called pili pili beef fry. Pili pili just means spicy. And that's beef and green beans and chilies sauteed with some aromatics. That's really nice weeknight meal. And there's an okra version, chicken and okra wet fry. Because I think okra, it's very, in certain regions of the country, very beloved, but we still don't have a lot of recipes for it. And so this is a nice way that you can saute okra, pair it with the protein, and have a nice little dinner.
Yeah, sounds delicious. One of the things that you talk a lot about in the book, and you mentioned it in the introduction, is the influence of your heritage and the style of cooking that you do. How did you blend that with the Californian influence?
Honestly, it's been naturally blended my whole life because I've been cooking from really, really young. I would spend weekends with my mom in the kitchen, and whatever she was doing, I was doing. She would make, we have this flatbread called chapati in Kenya. It's a very thin, like layered laminated flatbread. And if her dough was being kneaded, my dough was being kneaded. If hers got cooked, mine was cooked. And by age 6, 7, my mom was like, listen, she loves to cook to a very low level. It's for her, it's a necessity, not a hobby.
Right.
And so she put me in cooking camp since I was 7 and had taken cooking classes throughout my childhood. So I was cooking food that I followed of my kids' cookbooks, but also improvising a lot because my mom, if I went to her and saying, I need all these ingredients, she will tell me, use what's in the fridge. And that's that. And so there's always been, my style of cooking has always very much been on what's around because she literally was like, we are not going shopping. But also having families from 2 different countries, there are different preferences in how certain things are cooked. So I learned how to make a Nigerian style stew from my dad's sisters, went back to my mom's house, cooked it for the family, very excited for them to try it. But the Nigerian way of cooking meat for stew requires boiling the meat and then putting in the oven or pulling out the moisture as a preservation method, pre-refrigeration. Now, my mother's family are cattle ranchers. So having a twice, thrice cooked meat that's like a little bit dried out was a massive, massive faux pas, and it did not go down well. So I got the feedback. The sauce is great, but never cook meat like that again. So even between my families, I've had to adjust recipes and tailor it to people's taste because even then they had different preferences.
Yeah, and it's one thing that happens. You often think, well, if it's cooking from with African influence, it's all the same. But obviously, we know that that's not true. It's just like saying that the way we cook in California is the same way we might cook in Massachusetts or regional things that happen there, and that's not true either. So it is neat to see that you had that type of influence under the same roof and in the same family. And you use a term called third culture cooking. Tell us what you mean by that.
So third culture is a term that I'm glad it's floating around because for folks like me who are US born but have parents from overseas, the culture we have lays on a spectrum influenced by both, by our heritage as well as our upbringing. And that in itself is a whole different culture. I ate cheeseburgers as much as I ate jollof rice, maybe more,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm being honest with myself. And so the food I have and my view in the world reflects all of that. And so third culture is kind of what I have and my siblings have, separate from someone who's maybe multi-generational Californian, but also very separate from my parents and my cousins who live in Kenya or Nigeria.
Yeah. That's neat. So, one thing that you had to do then, and a lot of this was your mother's influence, use what we have, make the flavors with the ingredients that we have. That probably helped you in some ways write recipes that were approachable for home cooks who might have access to limited ingredients.
100%. I think even here, we're very lucky where the grocery stores have so much available to us. And part of accessibility is what can people buy. But I think a lot of it goes down to, folks are buying the groceries they're buying. And even though you want to try new things, it might not fit in the grocery budget. You might not want to waste food. So I think introducing people to recipes that are really rooted in the things that they're used to cooking or used to buying, it kind of lowers that risk. And it's also more cost effective. A lot of the dishes I even cook for my own book are based on what's left over in the fridge. If I have a lot of bell peppers, I'm going to make Nigerian stew, or I'm going to make jollof rice once they start getting a little soft. So that is very much ingrained in me from growing up. And I try to apply that now as a professional recipe developer.
Yeah.
Very much trying to keep solutions, but also people want new and fun and exciting, and finding the sweet spot in between the two.
Right. Did you have like a cutoff point for what you considered to be accessible and not accessible?
Yeah. So where I live in Los Angeles, which is already a regional and grocery store, but I have a couple grocery stores next to my house that I can all walk to. So I had ideas while writing the book. And if I could not find them myself, I either changed the recipe or we just moved on to the next one. So I did not put anything in there that I even had to jump through hurdles to source ingredients for. And then if I still wanted to introduce people to a couple little pantry staples because they don't go off as quickly like a spice blend. And so check to make sure anything I was introducing people to was, available on something like an Amazon or something under $15 that you can get delivered to you within a day.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible that we have access to ingredients and they can be delivered like that. It's totally changed the way that we look at it. But I also think that as a cookbook author, it's good to hear you say that you tried to really take into consideration, though, things that people could get in their local supermarket, and of course the cost of things and cost of ingredients. And I think also it's really neat to think that you can cook so globally without having a huge pantry.
I think it's because ingredients themselves are already global. Things that we all have, tomatoes, onions, garlic, they've done the world travel for us. They're not ingredients native to where most of us live,
Right.
but the grocers have done that job. And I think once people look through the book, they'll realize that a lot of folks have a lot more in common in the kitchen than they do differences. But those small differences can what make your home cooking feel new and exciting.
Yeah. So for your recipes, I know that you developed a lot of them, but you also captured them from oral recipes, family recipes that weren't traditionally written down. Love it if you talk a little bit about that and what process you use to turn these oral traditions from your family into recipes for this book.
So there's a couple recipes in Afri Cali titled Coco, Coco's cabbage or Coco's pancakes. Coco is what myself and my cousins call my grandmother from my mother's side. And she has 11 children.
Mm.
So when it comes to cooking, unfussy recipes is the target for anything my grandmother makes with 11 kids. And so when wanting to capture her recipes without changing the way she cooks, because that's the thing. The moment I put measuring cups and spoons into my grandma, she either one tell me get out, or it's going to confuse her and the recipe is not going to come out the same. So what I did was I would ask her what ingredients she needed to make a certain dish. I bought them all. And then I went into her kitchen ahead of time and weighed out every ingredient. So for Coco's pancakes, I weighed out the bowl of flour. I weighed out how much oil I with like a food scale. And then with my iPhone, just captured her cooking. And then when she was done cooking, weighed back all the ingredients to see how much was left. And that's how I got the measurements. And then from watching the video, from the timestamp of the video is how I got all the cook times.
So let's just, I want to be sure I understand this. So if she was going to make pancakes or some type of a dish, you would get all the ingredients and you would pour them out into bowls and weigh the quantity was in that bowl, but you never really knew exactly how much she was going to use, right?
Yep. I put way more than she needed.
Way more than you anticipated she was going to use.
It was a big bowl of flour.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you said, okay, this has got 5 pounds of flour. I'm making this up. And then she would make hers and there would be 3 pounds of flour left. So you knew that she had used 2 in the recipe. Yep. And you could see from your video then at what stages she put the flour in. Maybe she used some of it to dust on the counter, but at least it gave you a place to start in terms of where you could begin the testing and development for this recipe.
Exactly.
Yeah. How many recipes did you have to do that for?
Not too many from her, just because I spent my summers in Kenya since I was 6, every other summer from that school break. And so I've been learning my whole life from her, but there are a couple ones that I myself had not figured out the secrets. Maybe I wasn't in the kitchen. And so I have my pancakes from her. I recorded her doing my chapati, where that one is not exactly verbatim, but I use it to influence. That's the flatbread. How I do mine, just pulling some tips from her, and her cabbage, which there's a video. We actually shot it again as like a really nice, beautiful video that's on YouTube under my nonprofit page, Jikoni Archive. So people can watch my grandma cooking cabbage with all her secrets on there.
Yeah, and there are some beautiful pictures in the book of her making the chapati.
Yes, that's from that same day we shot the video of her. Because the moment I realized that my grandmother was a natural teacher, meaning no prompt, no instruction, I just said, we want to learn how. And she immediately started telling us technique, giving us history lessons. I was like, all right, we have to film.
And she was not shy of being on the camera.
She could not care less.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very sweet pictures. And, it's looking at the table with the balls of dough, and she makes a lot at one time. I mean, there must be, I bet there's 24 balls of dough out here she's rolling them out in one of the pictures.
Yeah, there's always a lot of people to feed with 11 kids. Everyone's married off, loads of grandkids. Cooking is never a small affair, unless it's maybe just her and my grandpa. But if I'm around, a lot of people are around.
And I think it's interesting for people who are perhaps younger or newer to cooking to realize. And I came from a family, I'm one of 8 children, and I said it in the first cookbook that I wrote. My mother wasn't cooking for jollies. She was cooking because she had a family to feed. And I don't know that she always particularly enjoyed it, but she did it every night.
That's my mom as the eldest of all those 11 kids.
Yeah.
Because that responsibility as the eldest daughter went to her. So she's very much last time I went to my mom's house I thought she was feeding me. She's like, oh, let's have a cookout. I show up. There's no food being cooked at all. I'm like, Mom, what? I thought we were having people over. She's like, oh, I was waiting for you to get here so you can cook. Yeah. She's fully just let me do it now. For her, she's retired from the kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that women who had big families, and I still admire that your grandmother, I'm sitting here looking at the pictures right now again, still does this, but it's often out of necessity. It's because that's the only choice that they had. And it wasn't because, it could have been a couple things. First of all, I know that restaurants were not accessible for our family growing up. And even if we happened to hop in the car at the same time and go somewhere, we would never have stopped at a restaurant to eat. We just, came home, or maybe one time went through McDonald's and, got a bag of hamburgers or something. And so I just think it's good for people to know that this is food hasn't always been done just like we're talking about here on a podcast about having cookbooks and writing cookbooks. It's not always obviously been this way. And the fact that this is just your grandmother and this recipes weren't documented and you now have documented them, that's good for families to do things like that. And I think that your technique is maybe something that other people listening could use if there's someone in the family that hasn't written anything down, that has always just cooked. Because if they're cooking all the time and they're doing it out of necessity, chances are they haven't always written things down.
100%. I think documenting family recipes right now is so important because we are in that time period where we are in that luxury of, do I want to cook? And that even that idea that you can question whether you want to.
I know. Isn't that the truth? That you can even say, do I need to, or do I even want to?
And that's new. And with that, a lot of this goes with, you know, a lot of African recipes, oral, but even just people whose families have never written stuff down. If we don't write them, there might come a time later in life where you're like, ooh, I love this thing that some elder in your family made, and you wouldn't have a clue how to recreate it. And that's such a shame.
Yeah. So that is a great tip. If you just measure everything, put everything out, measure the original starting weight or quantity, and then take pictures, watch them do it, take a video, and then whatever is left, measure that, and then you'll know the difference is what they use. It's beautiful. Great tip. So I hope people can really use that. What about writing recipes for home cooks then? Because not all of your recipes were oral recipes from Coco. They were things that you wrote and created. Tell us a little bit about your process for doing that.
So I've only ever recipe created for home cooks. So there's a couple things I try to implement to keep cooking efficient. I like to say as simple as possible without sacrificing flavor, because I think there was a movement of simple recipes and people thought that there'd be a concession with taste. And if I'm getting in the kitchen and I'm breaking half a sweat, it needs to taste good. Period. So I try to keep it as unfussy as possible without sacrificing that. So I'll write things. If you look at the ingredient list in the book, it'll say, for example, 1 medium onion. I won't tell you if it's yellow, red, white, because honestly, I don't care. It kind of goes back to with my mom, whatever we have is the one we're going to use. And I think a lot of home cooks who follow recipes feel pressured to have the exact ingredients. And so I don't specify when it doesn't matter. Because it truly, especially if you're cooking something down into a stew for 2 hours, it does not matter what color that onion was at the beginning. It's onion. End of day. And then I won't necessarily put the measurements or the cutting, how to cut it in the ingredients list. That kind of came about from almost like this chef concept of mise en place, where you prep and cut everything and then cook. I find that increases the amount of time you're in the kitchen, where I write my recipes, chop this, get in the pan, and while that's cooking, do the rest of your chopping. So trying to be efficient. You might risk, 10% more risk that you might burn something or char something, but it's home cooking. Who cares? As long as you don't make it edible. But the idea of just get started, get food going as quickly as you can, instead of waiting for everything to be perfectly chopped to cook.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that does make it, it seems like it's more of a flow of how home cooks might work and how they might do things. If you're baking, it maybe is a little different if you want to weigh everything out so that when it's time to put things together, or if you have to stir together, baking soda with flour. But when it comes to savory cooking, it's just a different ball game. And sometimes, a little bit of more browning or more char on, vegetables, if they're sauteing, it certainly isn't going to hurt it, like you said, unless you just totally were to forget about it and burn it. It really does enhance the flavor.
Yeah, as long as you keep your cutting board right next to the stove, I find that it makes the cooking go by quicker because you're not just standing and watching it and waiting for something to happen.
Yeah. What advice would you have for some home cooks who might be listening that thinks maybe trying some new recipes would be intimidating?
I think if you're wanting to approach something you've never made before, my advice is always to look at the ingredient list So you have at least a base level of comfort. So find a recipe that has the ingredients that you know and they're used to cooking so that there's less surprise elements. Because if you're cooking with a new vegetable for the first time and you're not sure how it transforms or how it's supposed to look, that kind of can add to the worry. Where if everything in that ingredient list is something that you're used to cooking, you have that foundation of confidence. And then the new is just like, oh, I've never combined it this way. And so, yeah, you got to give yourself a good foundation.
Yeah, that's true. So there's some desserts in this book also. We've talked about a few of the savory dishes. Would you mind if I asked you about a few of the desserts that
Oh,
caught
please.
my eye?
It's honestly one of my favorite chapters.
Okay. The chocolate birthday cake. I want you to tell us about that cake, but the photography for this cake is just gorgeous.
Oh, thank
It's a
you.
simple cake. It has so it's 3 layers of chocolate with the frosting in between the layers, but the sides not frosted, and then these beautiful sprinkles, plus the dishes you used and the sprinkles on the tablecloth and your earrings and skirt. I mean, it is just, they're stunning. So I've got to have you tell us about the birthday cake.
Oh, thank you. That cake, I mean, it's my birthday cake, so it's very special. Of course, it was going to make it into my first cookbook, but I think anyone who's picking up Afri Cali expecting, I don't know what they'll be expecting, but maybe chocolate cake is not it. In that head note, you'll get a fun little history lesson about where chocolate in the world comes from. Because right now, the two top cocoa producers in the world are in West Africa. It's Ghana and the Ivory Coast. And so the chances that the chocolate in your cupboard are from Africa are probably the highest, unless it's single origin from somewhere else. And so it was a great way for me to show one of my favorite desserts, but also to help people understand that Africa as a region is really, really, really big in production and agriculture and what it contributes to our global economy and what it contributes to what's on our tables over here in the West. But overall, it's just a really good cake.
Yeah, you say that chocolate and coffee, one of Kenya's largest cash crops.
Yeah, coffee and tea are really, really, really big cash crop coming out of Kenya, which is no shock because coffee is from our neighbors, Ethiopia.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of food coming out of Africa that I think because the finishing facilities are somewhere else can go a lot of the time without credit, where so much of the tea, if you just buy like English breakfast black tea, it's probably grown in Kenya. When I was living in London, I went grocery shopping and picked up zucchini and it said grown in Kenya. I'm like,
Wow.
who's zucchini? I've never had a zucchini in Kenya. The African continent for a long time has been feeding the world. People just don't know.
Yeah, like you said, if it's finished somewhere else, they wouldn't necessarily, they may think, well, this came from, I don't know,
Switzerland.
what, right. And then it's Kenya or
Yeah.
somewhere in Africa. So tell me about the green mango olive oil cake.
Oh, so this one is very much, I have some problem solution recipes, and a lot of them have to do with what's available in stores. I love mangoes. To me, there's no greater fruit. But for whatever reason, when I go grocery shopping in Los Angeles, when I was writing this recipe, I could not find a ripe mango to save my life. It was greenstones, greenstones. And I was wondering, like, what do people do with these? Do they just wait weeks for them to ripen? And when I was living in London, I had learned a cake called the Dorset apple cake, which is a simple cake, usually done with butter, and it has layers of apples in between. And it was so delicious. I made it for years. I'm like, well, a ripe mango is crisp, underripe, and tart, very similar to an apple. But I've fallen in love with olive oil cakes, as many cooks, especially in California, have. So I'm like, okay, so instead of this butter from English cake, we're going to do olive oil. And instead of apples, we're going to use this green mango that is haunting me in every grocery store I go to. And it is fantastic. It softens up perfectly and it's not too sweet because it's underripe. So the sweetness of the cake really balances with it. And now when I see green mangoes in the grocery store, I have a little sense of joy instead of disappointment. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I get a olive
Yeah,
oil cake.
can make your cake. It's funny, whenever I make a cake with olive oil. So if I was using butter, if we were using butter in this cake, it'd be probably 2 sticks of butter, and then or measuring out a cup of olive oil. Why does it always seem so different when really it's the same amount of fat?
It's when you incorporate it, because with the butter, you're going to cream it with your sugar. And
Yeah,
so it's kind of the foundation to begin of your cake making, or with the olive oil, it comes at the end.
I
And so you
guess
already
that's what
have
it is. It
what your
seems like,
brain looks like.
wow, I didn't realize I had to use so much oil, but it's the same. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's when they come. It's like the beginning of your cake or
Yeah,
like the final touch to your cake.
yeah. So anyway, that's looks like a delicious cake, and a simpler cake, a more rustic cake. You have this in the photo baked in a cast iron skillet. Kind of reminds me of, although it's not baked the same, like a pineapple upside down cake with, of course, pineapple upside down cake, though you'd flip it out and then the pineapple would be baked on the bottom and it'd come out on the top, but looks like a really delicious cake. And I went to a Thai restaurant once and they use green mango in a salad, and it was so good. And you're right, it is like a crispy, like crisp, not crispy, but crisp and tart, and it was really good in the salad. So try a green mango. And mangoes are one of those things, they're like avocados. They just, even if they are ripening in your kitchen, it's like they can go south fast.
Yep. Yeah, it's like you have to daily check in with them.
Is it time to use the mango? So this is a great way to use it. You don't have to worry about that. All right, a couple of the drinks. Dawa
Yes, we're in the
looks
season.
really good.
Dawa means medicine. So this is a Kenyan cold remedy that we've unfortunately been making a lot in our house lately. But it has just, it's like one of those nice brewed teas without tea. It's ginger, it's lemon, honey, a little bit of spice. For this version, I use cinnamon and cardamom, and a little bit of garlic, which is very much takes the back seat to all the other flavors, but it's just meant to help you feel better. All these ingredients have great health benefits. And I don't know, maybe that's something psychologically, but anytime I have it in my hand, I'm like, okay, we're on the recovery.
And did you say you drink it cold or warm?
It's warm.
Warm.
And
Yeah.
like I always think you could honestly throw a shot of whiskey in there and use as a alternate for a hot toddy.
Yeah.
It's very much in that drink of like mulled beverages, warm,
Yeah.
these cooler months.
Sounds great. And then one more. You mentioned Pili Pili, the pineapple margarita.
Spicy margarita. It is, I think spicy margaritas might be one of the most popular cocktails here in California. Everyone gets excited when they see it, but for me, the lime alone is always a little too tart.
Uh-huh.
And so I think pineapple still acidic, but it also has that sweetness. And I think that coastal Kenyan cocktails, the coast of Kenya feels very tropical, clear blue water, soft sand. This is the drink I want to have on the coast of Mombasa.
Yeah. Sounds really good. And I think you say you could use either tequila or mezcal. So it's nice to have that choice. And if you want the smoky flavor or not, it sounds refreshing. And I have to say, though, it's starting to get colder here in Kentucky. We actually had an evening last night, and this morning is really chilly. I think the dawa sounds good. And I suppose, like you said, if people have a cold or a little scratchy throat, or you feel something coming on, I'm sure it's very soothing.
Exactly.
Yep.
It's one, just get in the mug and curl up on the couch.
That sounds good. All right. Well, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing to promote the book.
So I've been on my book tour, started here in Los Angeles, did my home region in San Francisco, Detroit, and then New York, DC, and London. And it is because everything I've done career-wise has been on this internet. The videos have gone on the internet, everything. I've hosted the recipes, and the book being a physical thing is really special to be in person, connecting with people, talking about food, and also just made it feel real instead of being the PDF on my computer or the photos they see on Instagram.
I 100% agree with you. I think the best part of writing a book is meeting the people that buy it and the people that come to events. And everyone who's listening to this show is listening because they love the genre. They love to sometimes read them, uh, write them, collect them, cook from them. And there's nothing like a physical cookbook. And it's so exciting to think that you're now part of the club that has a print cookbook, and just keep enjoying it, keep enjoying the people that buy it. And it always is a fun time to get together with people and share all your knowledge about the food that you have created for the book and for your work in your video production studio.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Especially just having the conversations about the place African cuisine has, people's
Yeah.
familiarity with it, just so we can really just like help through community, encourage people to start giving this cuisine a try and fold
Yeah.
into their cooking.
Yeah. So I like to ask, as I'm wrapping up, if you have a favorite cookbook.
I do. It's such my favorite that there's not a home I spend time in that does not have a copy. I have one in my house, my mom's house, my grandma's house, because I refuse to be in a house without it. And it's the Dishoom cookbook. Dishoom is a Indian restaurant in London, and they just have such a wonderful take on the cuisine, but also opened up my eyes to flavor combinations I never thought of, which have inspired me in the kitchen a lot. Like they have the mango lassi, the yogurt smoothie. Every Indian restaurant has it, but they top theirs with fennel seeds.
Hmm.
I'm like, fennel and mango. And I said, what is this? And then when you drink it, you're like, mango and fennel go together. And so, like in my book, I have a mango cheesecake where I put fennel seeds in the crust as like a little ode to them.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. And I will link to that in the show notes. So, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about how they can connect with you online? And also, there is a link on your site to a list of African cookbooks. Share us a little bit about that as well.
Yes. So I founded a nonprofit called Jikoni Recipe Archive. Our mission is to document and really amplify the cuisine of the African continent. So if you go to our website, jikoniarchive.org, you'll find some listicles where you can find cookbooks that have been published already within the African genre. We're also working on a database that'll launch early next year that will have as many books as we found, from ebooks to pamphlets. So you can search. There's hundreds of pieces on there, most of them self-published, but we really want to have people find what's already out there as we keep championing the increase of publishing of books of these subjects. And then you can find me, just my full name, Kiano Moju, everywhere on the internet. I post reels and short form cooking videos on Instagram. And then the new year, we'll be launching my YouTube channel with longer form cooking show.
Nice. You don't have a YouTube channel yet.
It's funny because I exist, me and my face, on YouTube more than any platform just because of the work I've done, but never have had really the space and bandwidth to dedicate to building my own channel. But we'll do whole cooking show. So essentially be same ethos of Afri Cali, the cookbook, but as a cooking show.
Wonderful. Can't wait. So that'll be terrific. You say that'll be next year.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that online work and print cookbooks go together beautifully. And again, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, your beautiful book, Afri Cali, and all the good work that you're doing. And I can't wait to dive into some of the recipes, and I hope that everyone else does also and enjoy the work that Kiano has done. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Yeah, have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green, and until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.